Brother, so I'm gonna want to talk to you about like your most recent Substack on Eros and love and stuff, but
Okay.
it's been a while, so however circuitous is our path there. Um, Good to see you. We talked with Father John Gribwich a couple weeks ago, but that was almost an aberration in seemingly a larger pattern of not talking that frequently. And
Okay.
I'm sure I mean we're you're much more tied to the agricultural life, as am I, and a lot of our listeners know we talk about things like gardens and stuff. But
Uh-huh.
my spring was just so wet with clay soil. There's just a lot of stuff that looks yellow like it would because it was chilling in water for a long time.
Oh
And
yeah.
and then now we're in the midst, and I just have a third of an acre, and not even one fourth of that is a garden. But we're in the midst of a pretty good drought here. Like, what do you so I would say it's a tough garden season. I can't speak for the farmers, but I think it's pretty tough here.
Yeah, it's been it's been challenge. There have been challenges and good things. Like for instance, it was here we're not on clay, we're on kind of sandy.
Yeah.
So a lot of rain doesn't hurt.
Mhm.
But it was really hot and it rained a lot, so it was very humid, and that was kind of rough on the tomatoes.
What do you do for a fungicide being kind of
There are different things you can do. Some people will make a solution with baking soda, actually.
yeah.
And you
You've
can
heard me
also,
on hydrogen peroxide, haven't you?
mhm.
Read into it, Michael. I mean, it's like you buy it 35% in a gallon, and it really
Yeah.
works as a better, it's cheaper than neem oil if it's kind of works for you, a lot cheaper. It's almost free. You just
Hmm.
add a little bit, you get a gallon of this stuff. And
Yeah.
I spray go ahead.
But no, but there are other things you can do, horsetail tea, but if it's an onslaught and you have plants that are susceptible to it, it's not, you're eventually going to lose. Um, but it's just you're dealing with nature, so it's never the same thing. So for us, for
Right.
instance, we didn't really have problems with pests too much. Few to I mean, we actually had more tomato worms than usual, but it wasn't didn't damage any production. Um, but the potatoes, I mean, they're healthy, but we didn't get as big a yield as we would have because
Okay.
it was so hot.
Yeah.
Um, where on the other hand, the carrots and beets did really well with all that rain. So, I mean, every year is different, but it has been awfully rainy.
Well, let me ask you two things. Which for our listeners and for me, which run of the mill plants, vegetables, I'm going to say vegetables and fruits are more prone to fungal things. I would say my cherry tree is certainly tomato plants. It makes them more susceptible to stuff. What else um, do you think?
Tomatoes, I mean, that's the only thing we don't really have trouble with fungus on.
You
I
must
mean,
grow cherries because you're a Michigander. They don't like
we don't grow cherries.
oh, okay.
But um
Seems like a betrayal.
but apples can get kind of a scab on it, but we don't have the too many. The thing is, we don't have very mature apple trees, so they don't get many apples anyway. But our pears look good.
Yeah,
Pears look good.
yeah.
Um,
Mine too. I've got a small little dwarf pear tree, but it is producing this year.
but it's been hot.
Yeah.
I mean, and this week, I mean, it's hot today.
Do you add any water?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, me too. I do.
we have to water,
Good.
especially with being so sandy. So if
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah.
we do water quite a bit.
Yeah. So
But
tell me, what do you I before we get into the article, every magazine does something about like summer reading and so forth. I was just not thinking about, but next to me were two books, both kind of interesting that like our readers would probably find. One is courtesy of we'll get him on the podcast sometime. This guy Ryan Stansbury. He's out of a great parish in the diocese doing new things. That's where we have the kind of the priest, Father Matola, who gives some usury-free loans to like young people with houses and stuff.
okay, yeah.
Um, but they all of a sudden they wanted to review this book, Modernity's Alternative: How History is Formed in the Depths of the People. And what you have with it is an introduction by Pope Francis. It comes out of New Polity. Alfred, Andrew
Oh
Lloyd
yeah.
Jones writing out afterward.
Wasn't
And
Elias doing stuff with those guys for a while?
Yeah, I think so. And there's some good stuff.
Mhm.
There's probably, I can't name where I disagree. I think because they work out of university, we're connected with one. And then Rocco Buttiglione, who's just conversant. Is that a name you know? Kind of an Italian
I
theologian.
think I heard it from Elias Krim before.
Yeah. But it's about how America's different, some of the themes. Again, it's published. We're going to say Steubenville meets Pope Francis, meets like von Balthasar meets Neo-Thomas.
Okay.
Buttiglione is not like either a von Balthasarian or he
Okay.
was a big Dietrich von Hildebrand scholar. So
Okay.
pretty interesting. And what it's saying is that shorn from some of the stuff we learned from liberation theology, and it focuses a lot on Argentina. And Juan Perón, which we know through the musical Evita a little bit, many
Mhm.
people not much more, including myself. Really interesting, really interesting. There's um, it's almost like without focusing on synodality, there is almost like a scientific awareness from a European about something different that's in the American landmass with Catholicism.
Huh, interesting.
And me, I just tend to think again, it's kind of with Our Lady of Guadalupe. And again,
Right.
and the title has Our Lady of Guadalupe in it. Fascinating. Um, and then the other day I've been reading this Gerald Hurd. Fascinating. He was talking about, you would be interested. It's a guy named Colin Still, writes on esotericism, but he's got a famous book on William Shakespeare's The Tempest as a mystery play almost.
Oh
That
yeah.
in it, you see the 5 stages of initiation tied to the elementals and ether.
Mhm.
And I was reading something in this book by Gerald Hurd about how Hieronymus Bosch's The Garden of Earthly Delights is a completely, totally misunderstood work. And he too would say the same thing, almost a degrees of initiation into um, a Sophianical world.
Yeah.
And so what was cool for me is I see it online. If you probably Googled it yourself for our listeners, if you're trying to find a copy of this, they're all listing at like hundreds of dollars. But one, I think it was a library sale or something, but I saw one for 17.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, and then it came in, it was marked at 421 or something. But I
Well,
don't know if,
interesting.
yeah, if it's
You talk about that. Now, I remember this is a long time. So when I was in graduate school for my master's degree, so it's 1999 or so,
sure.
I was doing my thesis on Shakespeare and stuff like that. And there was a really cool book, which was about the romances, and The Tempest is one of them.
Okay.
The Winter's Tale, The Tempest, Pericles, a couple others. That these plays were really about initiation.
Okay. So do
You
you
know,
remember this book?
I can't remember the
Okay.
title.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can see the title,
Yeah.
and they tied it to alchemy and all this stuff. And I think there is something to that. There is something to that because I think those last plays that Shakespeare was working on were very different from what he did
Yeah.
before. And
Yeah.
I think the transition to those uh, was plays like Measure for Measure,
Yeah.
which is a play that's very theological and about religious hypocrisy. So some people were arguing that and maybe this is something to it, that Shakespeare, um, having grown up Catholic, but
I've read
having
that
to
theory. Yeah.
operate in a Protestant world, and if you see in his plays, he's not he's not when he has a monk come on stage. For most Protestant playwrights, a monk comes on stage that's like a stock villain, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, but Shakespeare does not do that with when he has monks or priests in his plays. So that's one thing. But the thing is, they were what this one guy in that book, which is I read 30 years ago or 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the suspicion, his line was that because Shakespeare was an Irenaeust who wanted peace between Protestants and Catholics, he was attracted to what we would call Rosicrucianism or Hermeticism
Yep. 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 Yep.
as a third way. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or as a way to preserve what was good about the pre-Reformation.
We could be on this theme all day, I think,
No, I mean,
including your
and I think this
Substack.
is true,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah. No, where we're at.
like Sebastian Morello, right? So he's jumped on the Hermeticism thing, In fact, I bumped into a guy who just came to visit the farm the other day, and he was all into Sebastian's book. Wanted to come and talk to me about Christian Hermeticism. Then I find out he knows this other guy I know, this other guy I know, and they all wanted me to talk to them about Christian Hermeticism, or we can call it Catholic Hermeticism, actually.
Yep, yep,
Um,
yep.
and because I think I think modernity makes you want to hunger for something like that, right? Because it's so
Absolutely.
hollowed out, right? It's so compromised. Every even our liturgical, like you said, like our liturgical practices are just disconnected from nature, which for most of Catholic history was not the case, and certainly in Christian Hermeticism, there's a big impulse to tie those things together, right? The
I think
book of the book
impulse
of
is a key
Scripture, the book
word.
of nature. Pardon me.
I think impulse is a key word there.
Yeah,
It works. It's not a program. You don't buy it from a publisher. Um,
it's
it's an
it's
impulse.
it's a metaphysic, or
Yeah.
you know, and I think when people are attracted to my work or Sebastian's or lots of stuff, that's what they're looking for, right?
Yeah. Well, exactly this same thing on Bosch. It it's hard for us to countenance it, but it's hard for us to enter the mental atmosphere, I think, of like, right around the Reformation. But it seems that you can compare two triptychs. One is the one I'm talking about, which includes the Garden of Earthly Delights. Then there's another one that was we know where it was. It was at a Catholic church, I think, in Venice or Spain, but it's
Mhm.
called Haywain, I believe. I'm not too familiar with that, but Haywain just fits the Catholic story. And the case about the one of the Garden of Earthly Delights is the guy's going to say that Bosch was part of an Adamite cult, and it was really beautiful. The guy is the author is so gifted at describing how
Yeah.
these things can go crazy, the role of Joachim Fiore and everything. And the key thing I wanted to mention, because I think it's kind of about your project, is that there was a way of seeing that, and we're thinking of Christian Rosencrantz too, thinking that Bosch could be both at the same time, right? That
Well, yeah.
He could be Catholic and also be interested in nature. And there was no
Well,
clash.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean,
How do those two worldviews intermingle? What would you talk about
well, I think what happened is it's a weird thing that happened. So you had on the one hand, you had the Protestant Reformation, right? Which was sucking all the fun out of everything.
like it was its job?
Well, like the Calvinist approach to the thing is just horrible, and the Puritans, they were, I love the thing from Chesterton, that the Americans have a celebration for when the Puritans came to America. Called He goes, we should have one for when they left.
I hadn't heard that. I've heard most everything, I
I
think.
do like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so that's the one hand, right? You have that kind of killjoyism. But on the other hand, and this is not the entire Catholic Church, but certainly an important strain of the Catholic Church at the time, which you've talked about before, with pure nature, which was coming out of the Jesuits and La Flèche University, and they were the guys who educated Descartes, which is a huge disenchantment mechanism.
There's no way anybody could argue that. Do people? And I don't want to make fun of any name, but like a good popular, I think Neo Thomas, a great guy. I think there's Edward Fesser. I just don't have the liberty to read as much. But would he be able to say as much about that? That like there was this kind of degradation of thought. I think Neo Thomism or Scholasticism has incorporated some of that, or no,
Well, I mean,
or that Thomas himself had
the,
anticipated them.
the
Yeah,
manual. This is like
yeah,
David Bentley Hart's problem with Fesser is,
yeah,
the manualist tradition was reduced everything to formulas, right?
yeah.
And um, all in the service of rationality, right? So
Right.
it's trying, and that's the danger with scholasticism. I mean, I don't dislike it, but the danger with it is it tried to turn everything into a rational proposition,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
Which even with the mystery of the Eucharist, right?
yeah.
So, and that was the problem that a lot of people had, that people had with the dogmas about transubstantiation and even the Orthodox, who, I mean, they certainly believe that the bread and wine is the body and blood of Jesus, but
Right.
they don't want to get into a scientific formula about how that happens, right?
Right.
The Orthodox say, well, it's a mystery, right?
Yeah.
We believe it, it's a mystery, right? And then you start to parse that things apart, and you try to apply a rationalistic metric to something that's a mystery of God. It's
Yeah.
not going to work out.
I
And
just
that's one
wrote a
thing.
note.
But
Yeah.
to go
Go
back
ahead.
to the Hermeticists, I mean, they were certainly, most of them were physicians or scientists of some kind.
Paracelsus is, just so
Yeah,
key. Yeah.
but they were also, in fact, actually, this question came up when I defended my dissertation, because I wrote a chapter on Henry and Thomas Vaughan, and it was called the Rosicrucian mysticism of Henry and Thomas Vaughan. And one of my examiners said, Michael, you picked all these weird people, because I had also John Dee and Jane Led and kind of degree. And I said, remember, Todd, I said, well, they're weird to us, right? But at their own time, they thought of themselves more as traditionalists.
Sure.
They were maintaining that, and I would not say early Catholic understanding, but certainly the medieval Catholic understanding of the relationship to the microcosm and the macrocosm, et cetera, et cetera. They were and they were maintaining that vision of things.
Yeah.
They were not into the Cartesian, dualism. They they thought that was wrong-headed. In fact, to start to pretend that are not invisible forces, and I don't mean gravity, at work in the world, or to ignore them,
Yeah.
is to ignore them to our peril, right?
And this is really your wheelhouse, but and when we were talking about Shakespeare, I don't think you and I have ever talked about this, or a way I think about a certain strand of this. Just like in Barfield's famous introduction to Soloviev's The Meaning of Love, which comes up in your article. He talks about an alternative tradition that has, the Pico delle Mandro and many others. But for me, and I get this, at the late 20th century blossoming of it that means so much to me with this John Cooper Powys. But this image that like there's a fifth gospel, there is one. Steiner had his own fifth gospel, but it's really that worldview, that ichor, that sap that comes through. It's in germinal form in Old Testament 4 in Homer, but it's there certainly in Cervantes, Rabelais, again for the Neo-Thomists.
Uh-huh.
Basically, at the time they're writing, you have Rabelais, who's just war for him is, yeah, sometimes you have to beat other people to kind of control, like who's going to put the crazy ant in an institution, right? Eventually, yeah, there are all those things in this world, but we don't need to make a big war out of everything. And if there is some type of war, his biggest punishment to his arch enemy, is to be a seller of green sauce. Rabelais went to hell, and he kind of was interested. He found a lot of nice people down there he thought were pretty interesting, right? And you see how that goes through Shakespeare, Rabelais, Cervantes. This is that other tradition, this fifth gospel thing. And like, has that ever been kind of a foregrounded theme in your own thinking or in your own work? Because I think it's very complementary, but also distinct to this area where I think, really your wheelhouse, which is, the,
Well, I think the other part,
I don't know nearly as much about Shakespeare as you do, you know.
the difference is, though,
Okay.
so Shakespeare, like in Pericles, there's certainly a Rosicrucian strain in that with Saruman. He's a Paracelsus figure in there who brings back an almost dead body to life. But I think the difference is not what because you could point to Henry Vaughan, not so much, but certainly his brother Thomas, who was an Anglican priest as well as an alchemist and a physician, and Michael Meyer, the German physician and Rosicrucian.
He was also a murderer in a series of movies called Halloween.
Oh, the different guy,
Like,
yeah, different Michael Meyer. Yeah. Also, he was on Saturday Night Live.
okay, yeah,
Started in Austin Powers,
yeah.
but but that so there's this part that we are mostly inheritors of, which is the intellectual part. Just like
Agreed.
you talk about Thomism, right? Well, that was like this much of Catholic culture because most people were illiterate. Nobody was just debating any. The people at the parish level, peasantry, they were not. They didn't care, right? So, so we're and where Shakespeare comes in, he kind of changes things because he is not writing for an academic audience. He's
Right.
popular entertainment. He's Steven Spielberg, right?
Or is it kind of like the Gospels? Like, let me tell you something now. He's going to grab two or three, an esoteric with like the geniuses, right? There's esoteric components and esotericism. Couldn't Shakespeare have been writing for uh I think that's the point of this book for Colin Still on Tempest.
Well, that's I think intellectuals trying to turn Shakespeare into an intellectual,
Okay.
right? Um, I I think this is my take. You know,
Was
having
he the 17th Earl of Oxford?
no,
Edward de Vere, Joe
that
Sobran, Joe
people have
Sobran.
done it.
I was well read into that theory. I just don't know enough. Of course, it's the one that was the first one I read, so I
Well,
like it.
that's
Joe Sobran.
that's elitist arrogance, right?
Well, no, we know what he compares it to, which I find interesting. And with this one, we won't make this a big detour because I'm not arguing on behalf of the theory. But I was reading this book at the same time as the movie Amadeus was out.
Right.
And Amadeus gave everybody the way it was in the movie, not Amadeus's journals, which my hero Stephen Vizinci, the great author who died, pointed out to me. But that Amadeus, he covered his works were covered in his tears. He had to sweat and work. And that a movie like Amadeus, it creates the fiction like the Harry Potter series does in the game of Quidditch. That all of a sudden people are just great at something without hard work. Kung Fu Panda. It's a panda who's basically just born preternaturally good at Kung Fu, and he doesn't have to work like regular people.
Oh, hold on, my wife's calling me.
Yep.
Better. Can we pause for a second?
Yeah. The Oxfordian thesis is put on hold, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay. Let me see what she wants.
Yeah. I'll stop here.
Okay. Thank you for the commercial break.
Yeah. Did you follow the basic theory? That the Shakespeare, the Oxfordian theory, would include Shakespeare being a homosexual, which is interesting. And so for Joe Sobran, if people wanted to see that he was defending something elitist, he was willing to accept that this great love poetry came from a homosexual. The other one, again, that when I compared it to the movie Amadeus, not the actuality of Mozart's life, but as I compared it to Harry Potter, there's a myth afloat that somebody could just be genius, right? You just inherit it. I'm magic. I've magic. And that the Shakespeare as Shakespeare theory does it. I'm not saying it does, so I'm not trying to like own you. But like I think this was something that was interesting to me when I was reading Joe Sobran. This type of cultural moment where we want to believe that some kid just be in the ghetto and be a great poet. Guido Pepperata, our friend, would say, well, that's a great myth because it doesn't mean we have to spend money on educating the poor. Isn't that interesting? Huh. Very interesting. What do you say to all that? No, I think all this is very interesting.
I mean, people don't want poor people to be smart, right?
Right.
They don't want to. And the thing is that
it works both ways.
What he probably was, and Shakespeare probably was before he escaped Stratford, was the schoolmaster. Just like if you've read Anne of Green Gables, those kids, Anne was a very good student, and then they sent her to teachers college for 2 years or a year or whatever it was, and then she's a teacher. And Shakespeare, similar thing. He was super bright, okay, and he was not he was not a peasant. He was not a peasant. His father was basically the mayor of their town. Right. So it was not like he was nobody. He was a part of the merchant class. His father was a glover, so they had some money, right? And I don't buy that he was homosexual either.
This would only be, I think that's a necessary corollary, as I recall the book.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, that's also,
if it was Edward de Vere,
that's also a hobby of the elites.
I know, but this would be also, there's a form of the elites, but there's a form of the elites that would be conservatives. That's why I'm saying it's Joe Sobran, like the arch conservative Catholic foe of abortion.
Right. Yeah. But I don't buy that at all. In fact, in his he probably got that from the sonnet sequences, right? because
I
people try
think
to,
that's where he put his focus. I do
yes,
think.
but people try to read the sonnet sequences as autobiographical,
Uh-huh.
and I don't know why.
I agree with you. They don't necessarily have to be.
No, and
I
what I
was
think,
once at, I've got a great anecdote on that. I'll just say it. My wife and I were gifted tickets to see um, Richard Ford. Have you heard his name? He's won the Pulitzer Prize. Yeah. And I liked him, and I think I've read every book of his. And so he was giving a talk at like writers and books, and one of the questions was it was about his female characters, and he just wondered like who they were all modeled on and this and that, and how did he come up with this in the female world? And his answer was, "I made him up." You know,
yeah,
yeah, I get it,
but I
and I'm
think
just saying
with
that's a point in
Shakespeare,
your favor.
and the sonnets, my theory, it was
Yeah,
what he was doing because there, in the Elizabethan days in particular, there were all these really shitty sonnet sequences. Everybody was running a sonnet sequence,
yeah,
right? Some of them are good. I mean, there were a lot of good sonnet sequences, but it was like, oh, this is good to be old.
yeah.
And they're all very Petrarchan, and Shakespeare makes fun of Petrarch in
Mhm.
Romeo and Juliet in particular, right? Because Romeo's whole problem is he reads a lot of Petrarch and he's like, my lady has eyes of dark pools.
He
You know,
can't see the lady for the ideology of
yeah.
yeah, yeah, sure.
And so Shakespeare, I think, when he was commissioned to do the sonnets, he's like, you want a sonnet sequence? I'm gonna give you a sonnet sequence. So he went,
That's a great thing.
his
Yeah.
sonnet sequences are anti-types. He's
Uh-huh.
running against the stereotype. You want
Yeah.
a stereotype about the golden woman? Well, I'm going to give you a bunch of sonnets about a young man, and then I give a bunch of about a black girl.
I'm guessing, and I'm only having fun here, but I'm guessing Sobrand's theory there would be that being homosexual at that time made you the outsider that you would need for those, you know, a
No,
rule
it's not
breaker,
even
a
close
rule
to
breaker.
true. Pederasty's been around for a long time.
Uh-huh.
Um,
I know, but the acceptance of it hasn't. If you're talking about outsider
well,
status.
well, acceptance, but there you have the elites, right?
Mhm.
Who that's
Interesting.
like a,
Yeah.
that's a it's a team, it's a class sport for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't buy that at all. But I
Yeah.
do
You've
think,
also, let me say, like, this is a major thing in your favor. I don't even bring that up with most people, but like, if you can imagine, think of universities. I think I have a couple of times because, again, I always preface it. I always, that I haven't read that much Shakespeare. I haven't read that much about the authorship question, but I can formulate some intelligent questions about the things I do read. And I offer them to you. You're the only person who didn't just say at the very beginning, shut up, get out of here. Are you an intellectual cretin? You allowed me to put forth what I thought were probably, and I don't even know the
well,
arguments, they were
I hear them
probably
all the
the
time.
things that if my guess was they would be upsetting to the mainstream Shakespearean community. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, the mainstream Shakespearean community all is really wants him to be gay as hell.
Yeah.
Um,
We had that one guy on who was about academic fraudulence. What was his name again? So people can go back to a previous podcast.
oh,
He was a great, right? It was about
yeah,
Arthur. Well, it'll come to us in the course of the
yeah.
conversation. You
But
go.
what I was so also with Shakespeare. So what I think he does in the place, and I've taught courses on it forever, and um, there is both a celebration and a mockery of the peasant class. He celebrates and mocks at the same time.
Yeah.
Same for everything and everything, not just peasantry, but everything. Um, and those comedies,
That's really interesting. Yeah.
they all end in marriages, right? And they're all absurd because people just meet and then they get married in the next scene, right?
Why is this important to you? Because I think it's
Because
very
I
important.
think that's what will part, and I think about this a lot these days because actually our films don't do this anymore. Our movies and films and television or whatever, they don't um maybe promote or uphold marriage and family and childbearing as societal goods, and
Yeah.
he does,
Yeah.
right? And it was, I mean, it was and it still is a good, I mean, but
Yeah.
the thing is, we actually, we're right now, as we know, we're in this great period of population decline, and also the decline of sperm counts
Yeah.
and
If
fertility.
sane people could argue about some of the details of like, was this all by design by power elites or not? If sane people could argue about that, I don't know, or elements of it. I don't know how sane people could argue that the atmosphere in which we swim is going to dictate something. And you're
Well,
absolutely right about the content,
they've been
whether or
pushing
not
it.
it's the biggest bugaboo ever heard called a conspiracy theory,
Well, they've
right?
been pushing this from at
Right,
least
right,
since
right,
the
right.
early '60s, right?
Yeah, yeah,
With the world is overpopulated,
yeah.
you know.
But
Uh,
let's say people think that's a bridge too far. It's still a huge issue that we need to address and change
and
because
according to Al
everybody's, yeah,
Gore, yeah,
yeah,
according to Al Gore, there should be no polar ice anymore, and we should all be underwater.
right.
Guess he was wrong, right? And that's supposed to be within 10 years, right?
Yep.
But to go back to Shakespeare, though, I think what I love about him, it's what I love about Robert Herrick, his near contemporary, is that he embraces it all,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah,
He's not a political player in that way, and I think
yeah,
if you want to think about it, that's what. I mean, and I'm not saying he was writing mystery plays, but I think he was interested in everything,
yeah.
and so and in the Tempest, I mean, some people want to read the Tempest as a mystery play, and there's certainly something to that, but it's also the fact that there's multiple veils of that because, as you know, at the end of the play, Prospero rejects magic. This rough magic I here abjure, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. And so there's something else. And the thing is that it's in a way that's like a rejection of ideology too.
It is. And I think that gets it, like the idea that you could be like, I want to suggest that there's a distinction with a difference between the idea that like, you could be a Rosicrucian and still just, we're going to give people the equivalent. You just
Right.
could just go into your local Catholic church, right? People did it as Freemasons and things like that. But we need to probably name that relation because you get a sense, like you were describing something there that was eloquent, and again, that it's this book seems to be making the case that Hieronymus Bosch was a member of this Church of the Free Brethren, a kind of a
Uh-huh.
form of Adamite version, but was also, without being a contradiction, he'd go to the Catholic Church, right?
Well, I think there was a lot
You
more
know,
plasticity in
yeah,
those.
right,
So,
right.
like for instance, with John Dee, the advisor to Queen Elizabeth and the magician. So, if you read, and I have read everything by and about him, um, it's some people think that before the Reformation he was actually a Catholic priest, which is why he was called Doctor,
Hmm.
Doctor John Dee, because he was quite a bit older than Elizabeth, and whether or not he was, I mean, his project with talking to spirits was actually his intention was to unite the divisions between Christendom. That was he thought if he could find the language of Adam,
Yeah,
he would, would be like returning
yeah.
to the still point, right?
Mhm.
And he was that's really what he would want to do. But it's interesting though. So here he was in England, right? Advisor to the Queen, you know, he's on Team Protestant, but he goes to the continent and he's visiting Emperor Rudolph, or was it Rudolph or whoever, Maximilian, who was Catholic, and he goes there, he's Catholic, right? And he even talks about going to confession, right? No real Protestant would go to confession with a Catholic priest, so in order so he could receive the sacrament. So there was a lot more flexibility or mobility between
Yeah, yeah.
confessions in some circles in those days.
What's the historical reason, mainstream, or your just own idea, why we lost that plasticity? I think it's relevant.
Politics mostly, right?
Yeah, I would think so. Nation state.
Yeah.
Again, like the Reformation is seen through the lens of, the wars of religion, right? This would be the main theory that William Cavanaugh, who we've had on, and
Mhm.
also that pseudonymous author Spengler, who used to write for the Asia Times, would be that the nation state has used the wars of religion to get their dominance, when in fact, during those things, which should aptly be called the wars of the burgeoning nation state, you
Right,
had Catholics and Protestants fighting against Catholics and Protestants,
right.
and that the narrative there's that word. The
Well,
narrative has like told us a different story.
but I also think, and this actually points to, speaking of Guido, this points to empire and church, right? Where and I think there's an argument to be made right now that part of the dynamic in the Catholic Church right now is Catholics against Catholics. Um, and this is a game run by those in power. Like
Right.
for so for instance, I still my jury's still out, but I'm not hopeful about Pope, what's his name? Pope Leo.
Yeah.
Um, but recently this Archbishop in Detroit canned a couple, I mean, some of the and Larry Chapp did a video about this.
Friend
Um,
Larry.
can two or three old, full professors at the seminary, Sacred Heart Seminary in Detroit, with no reason other than you criticize Pope Francis, you're gone, right? And he did that, and he's only been in office since March or April, and he also banned the traditional Latin Mass from his archdiocese, right? Which I from what I understand pissed off a lot of the other bishops in the state of Michigan.
Yeah.
And but that's really pitting Catholics against Catholics, and
It
Francis
is.
was
It
doing
is.
this too,
Yeah.
right? And because this is what happens when you have a top-down organization, right? You don't and that's part, and it's hooked in to the nation state. And I would even go further with Francis. I don't know about Leo yet, but with Francis, it was also hooked in with the World Economic Forum and those guys,
Right.
and that is a control mechanism.
How did we get here, though, in a sense that, like, Guido's book, and again, it's not just PR friends, but it's using the model. This all kind of ties in of the Guelphs versus the Ghibellines, right? The
Yeah.
Ghibellines at the time of Dante, we would look at them as kind of the ones who wanted, that believed in who's going to have the final authority. It would be the political powers, we might say. The Guelphs would have stood
Mhm.
more behind the Vatican, and he's saying that like the British American Empire, at least since 1880s, like has been the penultimate uh, Guelph type of machine. It's part, it's huge aircraft carrier that just goes around the world and runs its course. But yeah, so I think the church is still caught in the terms of the debate of those things. And you and I both think history, I shouldn't put the words into your mouth, but it's to like to go deeper a little bit, that I might think that um I don't think the Pope should necessarily be in charge. That has compromises, but the answer is something again from the bottom up. That's why I began with this book, Our Lady of Guadalupe, that we need. America has been tied into, it gets into these only one ways to do this thing called Catholicism. So much of our conversation has shown us that borders were more porous. The
Mhm.
work of William Cavanaugh is all based on how, again, we had overlapping loyalties. We owed this allegiance to the Margrave. We owe this allegiance to the nation state. We owe this to the church. Now we just have the nation state. In the definition of modernity,
Mhm.
is that we're creatures of that one medium. But again, like, how do you describe how we got here? And we need to be coherent on, like, what do we do about this?
Well, I think I, that's well, one thing I think
The
in the Catholic
Vatican's going to
Church.
Vatican, right? It does its
Well, the
thing.
Vat, but
Yeah.
the Vatican's going to Vatican, and the Vatican always has, but especially with the declaration of papal infallibility. I mean, talk about a power move, right? Um, which is a relatively recent thing in the history of the Catholic Church, even though it's like 100 and maybe 30 years or 150 years now. When was Vatican one? 1880? I don't know.
I think around there about some bad.
Yeah.
Could be gonna-
Um, so I think those and what's weird with the Catholic Church, I mean, if you look at the history of the Catholic Church, it's um these cool things happen kind of from the ground up, like the Celtic Church or the the cult of Mary, right? And they start, either at the outskirts or with the peasantry. the Black
I
Madonna,
agree.
right? And then
The Black Madonna didn't in Europe. That's a huge contention of mine. And it's an area where I probably disagree with Sebastian. That you could, I've read this book on the Black Madonna. He mentioned it our first one. It's not like
yeah,
he's hiding something, and I could be wrong. But I checked with TJ Germanario because he knows, and Stephen Clark. They both know Native American lore.
uh-huh.
That the Black Madonna came from the pre-Christian priest class. It was definitely a top-down phenomenon where in America, like Our Lady of Guadalupe, there's no way to say she wasn't like sui generis from the natives. It's
Yeah, I don't
interesting
know.
to me.
I
And
don't
I'm
I
just
don't
talking
know
about
if
different themes,
I
different
don't know if
themes.
I buy that from either one
Yeah.
of those guys.
Uh-huh.
That's kind of like the myth of the matriarchy before the patriarchy, and I don't buy that at all.
Yeah,
Uh,
it corresponds as you look into it. It corresponds in my thinking right
but I
now. Yeah, go ahead.
but I think, I don't think it has, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be that
No, right.
cloak and dagger. I think, the veneration of the Virgin was popular among the peasantry, as you can tell. I mean, it's
True.
the most natural thing in the world, right? And then I think what happens over time is those in power start to notice. And at first, they probably try to stop it, whatever it is. After, when they realize they can't stop it, they decide that they'll take control of it. And that's what I think happens. And it,
I can
and in
concur.
fact, I just found out about this book yesterday. Let me tell you the title. I haven't bought the book yet. I was going to order it, and
Oh, I'm gonna write it down.
it's called, I think, The Flowering Hawthorn. Is that what it's called? Do you know that book?
No, no.
Yeah, The Flowering Hawthorn
I was gonna
by
say I'd never
Hugh
heard of it, but
by
I
Hugh Ross Williamson. The Flowering
don't know it.
Hawthorn.
Don't know it.
And apparently it's a book of kind of folklore stories, like about Joseph of Arimathea going to England, all this
Okay.
Christian, English Christianity kind
Uh-huh.
of stuff. I don't know what the whole everything is about, but it looked interesting. But I looked up about the author. He had been an Anglican priest, and I don't know when he lived. I think he died in the maybe 1960s. He had to be in 60s or early 70s. He had been an Anglican priest, and then he joined the Catholic Church, and he was a big Catholic apologist, kind of like Valentin Tomberg.
Yeah.
But when Vatican II happened and all the changes to the liturgy, etc., he was just, and I think this happened to Jacques Maritain as well. They saw this stuff happen, and he wrote a book called, I think the book was called The Great Betrayal, about that. And people talk, and even my friend Roger Buck, and I love him to death, but you know and it's true that if you read Meditations on the Tarot, that Tomberg is rah rah team Catholic, right? We're doing the Pope, we got everything. But if you read the book that came after that, which is sometimes called Covenant of the Heart or Lazarus Come Forth,
Yep.
he was pissed about a lot of the changes in Vatican II. I think
It
he
was.
betrayed as well. And then I think he died when he was already 70 or 72, so he died, probably disappointed. And I think this is, and I was thinking about this is like a leitmotif of the Catholic Church. This, they inflict feelings of betrayal on vast numbers of Catholics, and then they're like, "Well, too bad. What are you going to do about it? You don't have infallibility, and you're not a bishop. Yep, listen,
Well, that's true.
pray and pay. You right?"
Uh-huh.
Um, and that's what I think. And I have no love for the ortho bros and that whole
We
scene,
know when we talk
but
about your own
what
article.
people are attracted to it because it's at least been stable. They don't change it every 50 years.
But aren't exactly what you're arguing in your article kind of making a case for the here comes everybody? That again,
Yeah, but
we need to get outside the Latin Mass. We need indigenous liturgies. We don't need uniformity. We actually need
well,
more diversity. Let a
but
thousand flowers bloom.
but I have to. Let me
John
back.
Michael Greer, let everybody dance their own. Let Tammany's
Yeah,
culture
but
rise. Yeah.
to answer that, right? So this devotion for the Latin Mass is a ground up thing right now, right? That's coming from the laity.
Yes and
And
no. In Europe, it is not. See, this is my wheelhouse because I have to do these things. In Europe, it's still kind of a blue blood phenomenon.
maybe,
And
yeah,
in
not
in
here.
and here, right here, it's ground up, but it suffers. And people who know me in my own diocese, they know I'll say this, is that when they say it's about like the community, it's very left brain, Michael. It's very left brain. And when they say it's about the community, so if you and Bonnie were there and you were just having a great time, you said it's all about the community, we can play. It's almost like we could just do the science. I'm just
Mhm.
going to open a Latin mass 1
No,
mile closer, not even half as close, and you're all going to go to the more local one. So is the community any better than suburban community? Does that make sense?
no,
It's
it
at
does.
least it's at least it's something I'd put out there, and I'm not against it. I'm not against it, but it's
Well,
open to some of these critiques, as is the Novus Ordo.
no, sure it is.
Yeah.
But and so is everything. But
Oh, absolutely.
the point I'm
But
making
it's not bottom up in
and this
Europe,
is why
right?
I
Yeah.
don't buy the synodality bullshit. I don't buy
Uh-huh.
it because it's like the chief executive is telling you we're going to do synodality, and they're like, "Well, I don't want to." Well, I told you we're doing it. We're doing it.
You know where I see the power, though? Where I
Right.
see the power is, I was just laughing
Yeah,
because I reread the documents, is
and
that at the
that's
end of his life, Pope Francis comes out and says, final document, magisterial teaching. So if you read the final document, he threw, it's like he woke up and threw something of a bomb out there. I think it's kind of a different story. It's not like right or wrong, but I think there's
but,
things afoot.
but I think the model is
Agree.
it's it's horrible,
Mhm.
and I don't know the answer.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's going to change. We both
Other
agree the
than
model is
it's like
horrible. Yeah,
this, like with John F. Kennedy with the CIA, I want to break it into a million pieces.
yeah.
That might be the thing to do. Yeah. So and I and I don't and I keep saying talk about I do not attend the traditional Latin mass and
Right, right.
not a I shouldn't say I'm not a fan, but I
And I'm with you on the suppression of it and Pope Francis being heavy-handed. You and I totally agree.
yeah,
It's
and
not even, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm like, hey, people, why shouldn't they want it? But the
Right,
thing
right,
is
right.
that the church
It's a
changes all the
no-brainer.
time,
Yeah.
and people feel betrayed. And I rightfully, I mean, my father felt betrayed with
But so we're going to have David Cayley on. Remember, let's address that with him because again, we're going to have him on. One little segue is at his blog, listeners, David Cayley. He's a fan favorite. We're gonna talk about Wendell Berry a little bit, just because we
yeah.
haven't, but also with this essay he's got that leads his blog on Eugen Rosenstock Hussey, kind of a sui generis German thinker. I think he's got a lot. David Cayley wrote the article just as a labor of love to see if he could do
Okay.
the deceased Hussey an honor by getting his ideas out there, as they're also expertly gotten out there. But I would say when let's remember to ask Cayley, is that Illich's point, doesn't mean we've realized it, would be that the church needs to, change form so much. He wasn't thinking about suburban churches with the Novus Ordo. He was talking about priestless Sundays. What do we do as a family? Way ahead of the curve. But he said the church right now has to be kind of very mobile because its predominant task, because the future is changing so much, is that mobile entity that can help people experience the total consuming experience of change. It's almost like the polar opposite. But I want to be honest that it's not hemming and hawing. The answer is not necessarily going to your suburban church, waiting for the parking attendant. We're still trying to devolve. And the Tom Bergian thing, ever since I've read him, I've kind of disagreed with that. I think we need to enculturate better. Just like John Michael Greer said, intersectionality is great if it wasn't led by intersectionality experts.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, it's 100% true. The same thing is that enculturation would be great if it wasn't left to like the local director of liturgy to do it
And but the thing
and
is, I mean, how do you
liturgical
do that?
dancers. Yeah,
And I think what
I think
happened,
it's happening. I think it's happening.
I don't know. I'm
Possibly,
just getting
possibly.
more and
Let me
more.
be honest. Possibly. Yeah.
Well, but I think what happens then, and this is I encountered this. I've had so many people visit the farm this summer
Very
who,
cool.
from reading my books and stuff, they like, and they're all hungry for something,
They
right?
are.
That they're not getting, even though they might go to whether they're going Novus Ordo or they're Orthodox or whatever they're not getting it, and they think I'm going to have it when they show up here. I'm like, well, I'm not just doing some stuff, but they want something. I mean, the thing is, when they look at my ideas, they're like, oh, it's enchantment. I said, no, it's not enchantment. It's the opposite of enchantment. It's being awake to what's real.
Yeah.
Right? And the thing is,
I don't know if you highlight necessarily that enough. I could see people taking it the other way, but I've never thought
yeah.
about that.
But in fact, there was
Yeah.
somebody who interviewed me for a documentary back here in May, And one of the things I told them, because it was a documentary on enchantment, I said, no, we're not. Enchantment, you know what enchantment is? The internet, right? All the stuff that we keep
You're
ourselves occupied,
very good
that's
on
with
this. Yeah.
enchantment. If you're talking about whether or not fairies exist or astrology works, that's not enchantment. That's being attuned to the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just the opposite. Um, and that's
Steiner's
if you
important here,
if you look
listeners.
at the
Steiner's important.
all those guys I was talking about, like the Vaughns, who were very devoted Christians. I mean, there was no question how devoted they were to Christianity. But they also, and I shouldn't say they also, because the Christian culture that they were kind of drawing on is the same as the Christian culture of Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola and all these people who had you could call it magical Christian understanding, but and they were not peasant magical Christian understandings. They knew that magic worked. They knew that astrology does have an effect, right?
Yeah.
They knew that the microcosm is related to the macrocosm, it, and they knew it phenomenologically and by evidence, right?
Uh-huh.
It was not just what we call magical thinking, right?
Right. Right.
And 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 so they weren't enchanted. The people who thought the scientific revolution was going to be the answer, that was an enchantment.
Right. What do you think? Thinking out loud, bear with me. The I mentioned before, and not in my heart or in my words, trying to distinguish them as being that the differences are more important. But if I go back to this idea of a fifth gospel, Rabelais, Chaucer, Shakespeare, Cervantes, and complementary to with this, like when I essay the modern world and maybe just admitting who I am, I'm not conscientiously thinking overtly about it, but I tend to think about young people a lot. Um, we have plenty of people interested in, I think, astrology, and that's working. What role, how does you and you again, you know more about Shakespeare than I do. um I guess when you were saying that, I totally agree, we have all that in common, and I wonder, and that again, this is probably why he's seemingly, it bothers me, almost impenetrable, but why John Cooper Powys is one of the brightest, we need him so much, is that he makes this other tradition so important. Just the idea of it's kind of there in Blake, right? You just see people, they show you the gestures of what it looks like to be magnanimous.
Mm-hmm.
They're not caught up in ideologies of the word love, but the heroes of these novels and plays, and think of your Shakespearean corpus. They're kind in all circumstances. They can put themselves into other people's places.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a good sense of humor, good tact, and things like that. And I think that's when I got into, I think early in the podcast, and then I repeated it many times. It might have been, I forget which podcast, anyhow, that like the esoteric has become exoteric, because the exoteric is now esoteric. Everybody's into it. It's
Mm-hmm.
the we need to make basic everyday who's our pity, mercy, peace, and love. There's Blake or Elvis Costello, peace, love, and understanding. you know and you're a folk music guy. How do you put those two in conversation? Because I do, from campus ministry, I tend to talk about this other theme, and we both know they're both
Well,
complementary. One is not war.
I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know.
In
I
the world
mean,
of politics, like Tim Dillon, this comedian, that other one, and it's just, I'm sorry to cut you off. The role of humor, I think, is bigger in this other one. That one tradition can grab the left brain and take the humor out of it. The humor is there in Shakespeare. But the
yeah,
humorous, I think of Tim Dillon, the role of comedy, bringing powerful people down in our times,
right.
is very, very important to me.
Well,
That's when I mention Charlie Chaplin, and things like that.
well, there's speaking of that, one of my favorite novels is Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco. Have you
I've
ever read
never
it?
read it. I know it. No, I know
It's a
it.
lot
Yeah.
of fun.
Yeah.
Because it's like a 400-page setup of a joke.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to give the joke away right now. So in that book, there's like these publishers invent this secret society. They don't believe in it, but they're just doing it to sell books, right? And so what happens that they're so good at inventing the secret society that all these secret society people, occultist types, think I must be initiated into that. I just didn't know,
I didn't know this
and it's
existed. Yeah.
hilarious. But it gets out of hand because all these occult types are gonna
Yeah,
there's the protagonist of the book. They're gonna kill him because he tell you know they've got all the whole thing with the robes and the swords and all this business, and they're gonna kill him at this one point. And they said, "Do you have anything to say?" And he says in Piedmontese, I can't remember Navka, I can't Gavate or something, but it translated is pull out the cork, which is something that Italians say, like, let's take
yeah.
you have a cork up your ass, so pull out the cork and let the wind blow out.
That's exactly what I'm about.
Yeah, and so that's and I think that's such a brilliant book.
Yeah.
Um,
This other tradition allows people to quantify, like think of a certain type of person. We all know them who just has more lore than you do. They've read about every grade of the alchemical path. When they can't quote a word of Shakespeare, the play within the play is how you catch the conscience of
well,
the
they got no
king.
sense of humor, right?
Right. And so like this other tradition, I think is the true, with one needful thing, the besetting sin of our age is a literalism. This would
Right.
be Owen Barfield, right? He would say, each culture has its besetting sin and its one needful thing. I love this heuristic, but he would say the besetting sin of this one is a kind of a deadening literalism. And the opposite would be the imagination for him, but also this kind of humorous, equality of all souls type of humor. And
Right.
I'll close with that wonderful definition of John Cooper Powys on humor, that it's modern humor is all based on the non-recognition of the equality of all souls, right? People
Uh-huh.
who think they're better than other people, we're going to come up for it on the great humorists, and they're going to fall because
Yeah.
we're brothers and sisters.
And but I think the problem right now, I mean, I love to look. I mean, I find myself reading more and more. I read folklore and mythology and stuff, and books about them. Um, and what was I were just talking about how a lot of these folk traditions start off with the people and then get appropriated by
Yeah, no, that's irrelevant. It's very
the
relevant.
the elites. But I think the weird thing right now is the internet or mass media is kind of like this great equalizer that flattens everything. So there is no peasant culture to speak of. There's no
None,
common
none.
culture. So there's nothing to come up. There's
Yeah,
nothing there. People don't get together in very often, at least not in general. They don't get together and um have
May Day
they don't have
celebrations,
they don't
Twelfth
have
Night
practice they
celebrations.
don't have
Yeah.
practices that they do together that kind of
Mhm.
occur spontaneously or organically. I don't
Yeah.
think so anyway. and and so they're left with the kind of internet flattening of everything, kind of like maybe by metaphor you could say the radio, right?
Yeah.
So remember when we were kids and you drive across the state or across the country and the voices on the radio would change as you moved west or east or whichever where you're going, and all of a sudden, how you doing there, Bobby? Yeah, how's it? But now if you drive across the country, they all sound exactly the same. They have the
Right.
same accent,
Or you have Sirius radio
playing
and
the
you're just
same
listening.
damn
Yeah.
music, right? There was no variety. um so there is no folk culture to speak of,
No.
or almost none. It- though even when I was a kid, there was probably, my grandparents could say there's no folk culture, but it was a hell of a lot more folk culture when I was a kid than there is now,
Yeah.
right? And I think about my grandfather. I mean, both my grandparents were born before television and radio. I mean, they had a very different folk culture that they were coming up with, right? Especially my grandfather in Ireland. Um, and I don't. So this is like, and so what you have, I think, is as a result of that is people like these people who've been coming to visit me, right?
Yeah.
Who,
Right.
who are trying to pick up the pieces
Mhm.
of a broken Christendom or a broken Western civilization, and trying to find what's of value and how do we. And they're all basically have the same question: how do we go forward?
Right. Right.
How
Right.
do we fix what has been broken?
Even this book by Bosch, he's the author is so great that he's warning people. Like, so he's making the case that like the central triptych, the Garden of Earthly Delight, is like again, for what it's worth, it has all these stages implied and the guy can break it down, but it's kind of it's possibly a pathway, an esoteric pathway. But the author is so cool because then he says, like, so we've lost access to this, right? Two things can be true at the same time. Some people, if they see that there is or admit it, then they have to play, cosplay that they're still finding that pathway when they're not, right? And the other people think all that world is cosplay. So they're not open for finding the pathway in our time, which is definitely through nature in some way, it seems to me. For me, again, the name Our Lady of Guadalupe is going to come up for the 7,000th time from me. Our guest Stephen Clark is talking about this 12-step groups, abstract expressionist painting. I don't know much, but he talked about Marth Rodko on this phone. Like I'm trying to phone on this show. Jazz music. These are things that are foreign to me, and I'm trying to figure out like where this thing could be burgeoning, these true local cultures. I'm very involved with Front Porch Republic. They're doing this, That's why I want to talk about Wendell Berry when we have David Cayley on, like from Wendell's position, from David's. They're kind of like wisdom figures to me. What are they seeing that's working in this area? Because I think this decentralization tendency, we haven't spoken directly about this scholar, but he was one of Illich's, Leopold Kohr. Every problem is solved by a smallness, because the problem is bigness.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. This might be an unpopular take about Wendell Berry, but I remember, I don't know how long ago this was. It's probably be at least 10 years ago, probably more than that, probably 12, when gay marriage became a thing.
Yeah, he took a different stand on it.
He did, and my take on why he took a different stance was, I'm tired of fighting.
I don't think so. I think he was saying that basically, there could be speckles of paint in this wall that under an electron microscope don't look the color gray I'm seeing, but it's gray. He's saying that like this capitalist culture, the church is sold out on every front. I think you'd agree with it. That we have no difference. We have no true gender. There's no dance. So we've reduced, even in our churches, marriage to this economic arrangement. So why not give it to the people? Like, why lie to ourselves? Why lie to ourselves? And I'm not saying I agree with them, but I think it was along those lines. And I'm sure.
Yeah, but it seemed like, okay, quitter.
But politics aren't culture wars. This would be Guido Pepperotto. Aren't culture wars at the high level they're given to us just a bait and switch tactic, a divide and conquer thing? It's just, this is actually a predominant theory out there.
Well, of course it is, but well, I put it this way: you just people. Well, we laid down our arms a long time ago.
You're right. It's called the betrayal of the left. I always tell people I'm a leftist critic of the left. Where's our dedication to? And you are one of the remaining people, like to challenge power. Why the love of big pharmaceuticals? Why the love of the intelligence agencies?
And look, they're all right in there too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was mind blowing this week. You probably, not to digress too much, but you probably saw that Bobby Kennedy cancel like 500 billion in contracts for mRNA vaccine research, and those people who used to be anti big pharma lost their shit.
Yeah.
And there's been a full court press on in the media that they own,
right?
So they were.
This is the heart of the matter. But again, we would add to our true leftist cause. You and I, we dissent, a party of dissent. But one thing we should dissent upon in principle is scale. That's like the subsidiarity piece. That like this Western, I think in your article, I found like it's a theme I think about a lot now between Orthodoxy and the Roman Catholic Church. But this Tomberg would say we got dirty. We got dirty. And I don't know. And Orthodoxy at its worst, thinking of your critique of Mount Athos, that it's sure it's got this thing, but the dirtiness, I don't know, even Tomberg himself, I think he betrayed himself a little bit after. And I love that guy. We might disagree on what he was saying about the church after Vatican II. But and I'm sure I disagree with our friend Sebastian Bach. Or is it Sebastian is his first name? No, Robert.
Morello.
Oh, right. Yeah. No, I'm thinking of Roger Buck.
Oh, Roger.
Yeah,
Roger
and maybe Sebastian too. They're both smarter than me. But I think something bigger is going on. This again, religion. We talked about Christos Gianaros with Cayley. We're all just taking the category of religion as the reified way those in power want us to take it.
Well, and I think with Roger, and Sebastian to a degree, and with a lot of people who, and even with Ortho Bros, right? They're looking around, they're going, my God, modernity is bullshit.
Yeah,
You know, the
it's him.
post-capitalism is just the worst thing
Right,
ever. There's got to be something of value. So they look back,
right.
right? So the orthodox they're thinking they're getting, and you, this is something that's gone out through history,
Yeah,
right? The Protestants thought they were going back to what the early church was. Sure,
yeah,
they were,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um, and
It's
I
totally
appreciate
relevant.
that. Now,
Yeah.
the thing is with me, I mean, if what makes me different, maybe,
And they're concerned about morality. They're really concerned about morality. These
well,
same two. Yeah.
I think with me, I mean, people probably misunderstand me, thinking that I want to go backwards, and I don't. I can't bring myself to going to the Latin mass. I mean, I will
Yeah.
go if
Oh, and you both agree with the heavy-handed tactics of Pope Francis. I would
and
say that these
and
things.
I can't. I just can't. And it's a tragedy for me because I wish I could do something, but I can't. you know, please, I wish I could, but I can't.
Do something. What do
But
you mean
but it's
exactly?
not. But it's
Like,
because it's I don't because people think if we just recaptured X moment of Christianity,
oh
everything.
yeah, yeah. No, no, no,
You know what I
no,
mean?
no,
And
no, no, no. Right.
if we just got more plurality, I don't know the answer. I do not have an answer, but I but the thing is, if people look at my work and think that I'm trying to pick up something from the past, they're dead wrong.
Agreed.
But I don't know what I put up. What I feel in my soul does not exist. And here, actually, I'm going to tell you this. I had this dream the other day.
Please.
Um, and I've been puzzling about it for a couple of days. And it was almost like a lucid dream because I was kind of not quite awake, not quite asleep.
Those are the best.
And I was going by a lake or by the shore, and I was wading out into the lake, and there was a woman in the water, but lying down like flat on her back underwater, and I thought she was dead. And then I said, but I went to pick her up, and I realized she was sleeping because she opened her eyes.
Yeah.
And then I woke up, and I think that's kind of a metaphor for my relationship to the church right now.
Yeah, but Sophia, church, a little bit as Sophia, Sleeping Beauty. You're a
Yeah,
poet, Mike. You're trying to promote music. You're always promoting the good, tearing down the bad. Like in your daily life, you're doing it. You're doing it, you know. But I think that's where we're at. We're tending a garden. Jesus, not Jesus, but at the beginning of Scripture, Adam walked amidst the garden, right? Didn't
yeah.
out of Eden. I don't think we walked amidst it. We started messing with it, right? We were subsumed in it. We were drowning in it for a while. Original participation. Now all we do is like strip mining. We've been instrumentalized to just mess with her. And now the poetry of everybody we've been talking about, these other traditions, together they probably do constitute a fifth gospel, but they're pointing to a divine kiss of sorts, you know?
And what
Yeah.
happens though is those almost immediately become political gestures. You know what I mean?
Put that another way.
Well, if okay, I'm going to find the pristine church. I'm going to
Right.
find the moment in Christianity where
Oh,
I
right, right,
think it
right.
all went crazy, and then immediately it becomes, and whether you intend to or not, it becomes a political stance, right?
Yeah, but these people coming to your yurt, I've had some, and we both had a lot with correspondence. And I think I speak for you every single time. I'm so honored. I'm speaking. He's going to be on soon. This guy, Philip Baldoni, he contacted Guido. He's going to be great on academic disenchantment. He's seen it all. And people could look up his website. The guy's for real. And I'd be, while it's still happening, he's like our friend Adam Smith, kind of waking up to it all. He was raised in a very secular environment. He's just in questioning everything, educated at the highest level. But I lost my train of thought completely as I started talking about Philip, who's wild. Oh, but we've had
Uh,
people come to us, and I would say, I think this is relevant. I'm going to ask you what you would say, and I don't have anything, never would, but it's kind of like brighten the corner where you live. I once pursued my friend Bill Kaufman like
yeah.
this. I'd seen a writer in Chronicles magazine who was cutting between left and right. It was something about localism. I kept on wanting him to form a bigger movement, and I'm kind of embarrassed, and Bill could hear this sometime, but it would be a nagging question, even if I only asked him formally twice, was like, okay, so what are you going to do about it where I could maybe sign a pledge or something? I think that might have been latent for me. And of course, it was going to be more than a pledge. But where I am now is you got to brighten the corner where you live. Guido's like, build the theater. I've worked on Richard Werner He's one of these dangerous radicals. I was at a conference with him in Italy with Guido Preparati. He was on the Tucker Carlson show. So,
Huh.
listen to Richard Werner. He's a good buddy of Guido's. Like this world is coming together, I think, because we might say a lot of this is driven by money, a usury, the whole system here.
Mhm.
But yeah, what would you tell people? And I'm sure I say more because it would be
Well,
interesting.
I agree with you. I mean, bloom where you're planted. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
Find what work for you is also play and be passionate about it.
yeah, I mean, I don't. I mean, the thing is, at everything, at every corner, and I think this is true. So for on my YouTube channel, for instance, I, it blew up a while ago because I did a thing on propaganda,
Oh, it's
but
awesome. It's a
I
good
don't want.
topic.
But I don't, but I, because, I was like, they told me that I got a message from YouTube say, if you're not doing anything, you got to start over from scratch. And fuck.
Wow.
So, and I said, I'll do my spiel I used to give to college students about propaganda. It's basically a lecture I used to give to students. And it blew up to like 150,000 views or something.
Wow. Congratulations. That's great.
But then, I don't want to, but the thing is, the algorithm wants you to keep doing that same kind of thing.
Sure.
And I don't want to, but I
It's
can't.
kind of how we began, or our production values and things.
Yeah.
We should be having inflammatory quotes, and if we
Yeah.
should do better. Again, it's like it's not one or the other. We could be, and it's all on me. We could be a little more sensitive to listeners and give a shit about something. But I think my son Aiden told me that some of the fan base of very aware that they're content driven, production of content. You need quantity of content.
Yeah.
And I hope our listeners appreciate that we're not driven by this same thing.
And I don't want to become a commodity, right? I mean, but I think that kind of runs the world right now. Even if you don't want to become a commodity, you're a commodity.
But
right?
These informal webs, you're part of a web that I'm part of, and you have a web that overlaps with mine that's distinctly yours. There's Venn diagrams forming around. They are, Michael. Some days I see it more clearly than others. In my own diocese, I see interesting things happen. I was connected by a guy. I'll have him on sometime. Fan of the podcast, John. He was a wild story, evangelical, just a crazy tale to tell. He's getting woven in with other people. He was a fan of David Cayley before everything, saw this connection. I think networks are being formed.
Well, I think so, but and I knew this happened. I thought this was happening with the radical Catholic reimagination of everything movement.
Okay, yeah.
But then it fell apart with COVID, right?
Yeah, right.
I lost all those friends because of my position about the vaccines. And I was still right. But
I didn't realize you would tell the story that way. That's right. There was a thing behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I lost all those friends because of that.
Wow.
I mean, a lot of friends. And there was a lot of movement at that time. And which even pissed, I mean, I still, I'm still kind of bitter about this because even I had all these friends I thought were good Catholics, and
Yeah, but how about this? Don't you think?
No, let me finish.
Go, please.
But then when I told them that Bonnie got sick from it, I got nothing. I mean, no sympathy.
Right.
I'm sorry. Basically, I'm sorry you think that happened to your wife. But the thing is that
I see it.
what I'm saying is those
real.
networks can easily fall apart. Is that one?
We just got to keep on stitching them back together. Let's say with your children, you're never going to give up on this, right? If it was your children, I mean, you give up for a time. Right. You can say, I'm done with this fight for a while. But it seems to me we all got to get out of our chair daily and just start stitching the thing one by one back together.
Yeah, and I mean,
I think you're open to that.
So for me, I mean, and this is the question of our age, right? Because how is and I don't think it's something you can do. I think John Michael Greer would say, you can't make a culture, but how do you nurture one? I don't know if we have. I mean, do we have a culture? Has the internet and modernity just destroyed the whole idea of organic culture, or is it? I mean, but I think on the other hand, I was talking to Therese yesterday, and I think she made a good point that despite that, you know, that's how I connected to you. It's how I connected to Reese, right? And I made a lot of connections to people through the internet or
Yeah.
through that.
Sure.
But nevertheless, does it still seems to me that there's um something that inhibits the and I don't, maybe this is something that we're going to have to go through as humanity for 1,000 years or 500 years or something until we get it figured out. But you know that maybe I put it this way, maybe this is the real dark ages, and that what we have to what will have to happen, is something is going to have to rise from the ashes, and we'll just have to let it die or something. I don't have the answer, and I think that the weird thing, it might be that the internet and stuff like that give you the semblance of culture.
I think totally. James Tunney's brilliant on that.
Mhm.
And I think, honestly, with this idea of, think of Steiner, maturing, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Where we are now is, and this ties it back to where we began with maybe 5 alchemical degrees of initiation. But right now, think of Steiner's gesture for St. Michael, not a swashbuckler in front of you, but telling you to Michael Martin more. But he's asking you to get out of the boat. And I don't think you even see the hand of the master,
Mhm.
and that we have to create it. So again, this is why that I'm fascinated with this triptych of Hieronymus Bosch. It's almost like you have I read this week, I think I could say that Illich was a messianic thinker. We're going to hear that Rosenstock Hussey was an eschatological thinker, right? Both are very powerful.
Sure.
Both are very powerful. But like the messianic, the moving into it right now, like, we need to reshape our perception. We could start to move into this world, some type of gesture. Powys, at the end of his life, he had a gesture where he said you could, and Theodore Dreiser received it. He had walked away from his apartment, and Powys could focus on something, maybe just 50 yards in the distance. You might see a weed growing around a yellow fighter hydrant. Do you see something? And he says you could kind of like smother that with your consciousness, almost in an erotic embrace, but you can project your consciousness. I've worked on that some. I don't think anything wrong with it. But I know he wasn't pulling out of it his ass. But
Mhm.
sui generis, he was saying there's these new gestures we have to do. And again, I equate it with this idea that we have to come up with something new, like we have to grow a new prosthetic arm and a new instrument of perception. But I know some of this is in Steiner, but we have to just move into it. Nobody is going to do it for us. And I think you're very eloquent on this. But I honestly think that's where we are.
Mhm. Yeah, and we're all coherent, as John Donne says, all coherence is gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Coherence is a key word, super key for me. Coherence, that young people, we need to promise them that coherence could start being lived today for me. There's this great Jesuit anthropologist. There's just no scholars of him. I'd want to have him on. His name is Marcel Jousse, Jousse, but it was all an anthropology of jest, right? A bodied thing. He was this preternatural Jesuit genius of the 20th century. But the book about him, it's quite expensive, but there is a hero out there, Philip Seifert or something. But it's it's all about gesture and, oh, what was the key? What was the key point there, Michael? I mean, you're just, oh, it's written in the body, but it's universal also. Like I really believe that, like at the base level, before even tribes, some of the gospel is just universal. And it can be, and when Kaylee's on, he can talk about true mission efforts where you take how you would describe the gospel. And your only goal in mission work, Michael, is how you would hear the gospel and give it to somebody else to just plant the seed. But this guy, Olivier Donovan, who was in Africa, that's what he did with the Maasai. But we know enough about language. We don't have to control like the Latins did, control the reception of it. That
Mhm.
all these languages go back to a primal language. We just share the seed. And I think we have that freedom now. But there's a fourth form of liberalism, that a Jim Martin liberalism that just wants to see a fake form of color. But that shouldn't dissuade us from taking the risks necessary for more
But
enculturation. And
but I think
go ahead.
those examples you gave, with going to the Maasai or
Yeah,
Martin pluralism, whatever you want to call it,
sure.
I they and this is, are you sure the Messiah were better off afterwards?
It's tricky.
Um, And that's the thing is what I
If they
think.
won't overly missionized after that, Illich would say if you bring them schools,
We can go
no, it
missionize.
would be worse. It would be worse.
Well, missionizing them with what? With you come from a culture that's in disarray and falling apart.
It
What do
would
you?
be this, Michael. It'd be this, that even in that culture, the role of the individual, it's not preached as a feminism or something, but there was some good news about an individual. That if your old tribal customs meant that, people had to be like, if their penis had to be whacked off, and that's, something like that. That there's a message that the God, I've talked to African priests who said, we knew the God, we knew that there was something that created the whole kit and caboodle, but we tried to appease it. We would offer a carrot to it to do this. We would offer 3 goats so that something would go well in the future.
Right.
Then a priest came and showed the crucifixion. They said, we realized all of that was superstition, that this God that we were so terrified of is for us, as Gusani would say in Communion and Liberation. He's for us. And this is a message that people need to hear, but we don't have to control it much beyond that. That's why in this movement, God is active in this world. There's interesting things going on with communion and liberation. That Harvard biologist we've had, I'm forgetting his name right now. He's spoken at their conference. That but their main thing is reality is for us. And again, you're not for this kind of supernaturalism, you're for reality.
Right.
But I think these are some of the themes of it.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, I got, I got nothing.
Yeah. I don't know. That's kind of a song I sing. I don't know if it makes any sense, but we can lean into it. We can. Which is what we do in the show, the Regeneration Podcast. We're back up and running. I'll send you an email with the next 2 days with the plan for
Okay.
times and dates for things moving forward. What are you doing
Sounds
today?
good. Well, nothing. I'm gonna try to not go outside in the heat.
Hot as Hades, hot as Hades. Same here. All right, love you, brother. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
All right, take it easy.